So today's topic is regulatory intelligence. Looking forward to having an interactive presentation on today. So today's learning objectives are to define regulatory intelligence and its importance to companies, to identify multiple sources of regulatory intelligence, to evaluate the constantly changing regulatory landscape, which is, of course, part of the reason we have this learning opportunity because it is constantly changing, to evaluate a regulatory research question and to researchable units, and to conduct the research using a regulatory intelligence database, to summarize and present regulatory intelligence back to a team. So first of all, we want to lay some foundation for today as we proceed to make sure we all understand what is regulatory information, which is one of the fundamental parts of regulatory intelligence. So regulatory information is indeed the act, according to the DIA Regulatory Intelligence Network Group, the act of gathering and analyzing publicly available regulatory information. Note the word publicly available. This includes communicating the implications of that information and monitoring the current regulatory environment for opportunities to shape future regulations, guidance, policy, and legislation. So here we are looking at this information as being one of the basic building blocks of regulatory intelligence. We will be talking about the differences between the information and the intelligence. The information is the raw information. It can be oral, written, published, unpublished, and we're also going to be talking about some of the sources of that information and how we can use it. So, the differences between information and intelligence. When we talk about intelligence, we're talking about the capacity to acquire knowledge and experiences. It is active and related to analysis and surveillance versus information where we're talking about the data dump really. It's the raw information that's used to create that active surveillance and analysis that's being done. So, for example, we can ask the question, what do we know about the competitor products? Or that question may be asked. What we would do from an information standpoint, we would gather information on the competitor products, such as trade names in all countries, route of administration, labeling information, pivotal clinical trials, drug class, submission and approval dates in all countries, and types of submissions. These are examples of information that we would gather to answer the question of what do we know about competitor products. Now, the place where intelligence would come in, regulatory intelligence, is where we generate a regulatory intelligence report that includes an executive summary, which we will talk about soon, and that will review the competitor products on the market and under development and the current regulatory landscape and submission routes. So we would be taking that information that I just described, summarizing it into a way that can be used to move forward in a direction for your company. So now that we've talked about what the regulatory information is and looked at the differences between information and intelligence, let's bring together a little bit more what is regulatory intelligence. So I'm going to summarize this slide by saying there are three major points for you to remember as you talk about regulatory intelligence. Gathering data is number one. Number two is analyzing information. And number three is your regulatory strategy. If you remember those 3 points, that will help to guide you and keep you focused on what regulatory intelligence is. Regulatory intelligence is really one of the most oftentimes misinterpreted roles in the consulting portion of most regulatory departments or environments with our pharmaceutical and device companies. So here, of course, it goes into a little bit more detail on the slide, talking about what regulatory intelligence is. And it really is the creative part of regulatory affairs that is not often thought of or considered. So hopefully by the end of today, you will understand why it is important and you can take that back to your company. So what it is not. What regulatory intelligence is not, it is not competitive intelligence. That is typically the marketing department. It is also not just proprietary information, sales or marketing information, simply drug pricing or insurance information, reimbursement issues, or just regulatory information. Regulatory intelligence is using that regulatory information and maybe some of these other things to summarize and give an analysis of the situation so that your company can move forward in an informed manner. Later on in this presentation, we will also look at the directed research and surveillance parts of regulatory intelligence in more detail.